have a brief talk prepared about the sort of state of the Cancer Center. And I'll say at the outset that the executive summary is it's almost all good news. There's one dark patch in the middle we'll talk about, but I think overall the state of the Cancer Center is very good. So here's what I plan to talk about today. I want to show a little bit of good news in the beginning of sort of recent awards and grants and publications. I want to talk about the UCRF Refresh project that has been in progress that almost all of you have participated in, and I'll show some of the initial results from that. I'd like to talk about the core grant competing renewal, since this is the year of the core grant, and we are preparing that actively now, and many of you will be helping in that endeavor. I want to mention Marsico Hall and the renovations to the Lineberger building. Lastly, I'd like to talk very briefly about sort of the scientific focus, and much of that will be touched upon earlier on the talk. And then there'll be some time at the end for questions and answers, and I hope for, again, a lively discussion like we've been having at these UCRF initiative reevaluations as well. So first, the good news. In terms of publications, there really are like 100 I could have chosen. It's a real grant. I mean, we're a real paper factory. There are very many high-profile publications in the last 12 months from Cancer Center members that have been wonderful and terrific. I chose this representative slide for a couple reasons. First of all, Shelley made it, so I didn't have to do any work. That's key. Second, it represents all three sort of the UCRF big bets. There's pop-sci, and then genomics, and then drug discovery, and they're quite remarkable papers that are real leaders in their field. And lastly, as will come important later, all three of these individuals were recruited by the UCRF. So it really sort of speaks upon the impact the UCRF has had at this institution in terms of recruitment of new individuals. So a lot of great papers. I think we really do very well as an institution in terms of publishing our novel research findings. And from my mind, that's the most important thing. This is more important than grants or awards. Papers are really what drive science. And so I think that this is a really wonderful statement to our faculty. Similarly, grants, we do spectacularly well. I mean, Mark Kramer and I were just in Rhapsody today, just sort of discussing all the new awards that have come in recently. This, again, is a subset of awards. There are many things that are not even shown here, and they're quite amazing things. I'll just point out, Dean Gunn has 6 R01s. That's got to be some kind of record. Kurt Ribbleswell has this the new T-Course grant, which is $20 million. I think there have been a number of great team science awards that have been funded. And this slide is like 2 weeks old, and it's already out of date because there's a bunch of even more new stuff. Jeannie Ting has had 2 enormous grants funded recently. We just learned about the Malawi U54 having the best grant in the studies section, which is quite remarkable because this is a signature program of the NCI, and our institution is very good. The 3 clinical grants that we were recently awarded, the UM1, the LAPS, and the ITS, are really an imprimatur of the national community. This is an excellent place to do clinical research. And several new R01s, and believe me, getting a new R01 in this environment is really impressive. It's a 10% pay line world, and that is a real feat. It's like taking Stalingrad in February. I mean, it is tough to do. And so I'm very impressed that that's still happening on a regular basis. So, and then some new honors. I think, we have had 3 people recently get into ASCI, the American Society of Clinical Investigation, which is for young physician scientists. In fact, I don't believe there's any non-oncologists to get an ASCI in this period. So the oncologists are doing quite well. We, as an institution, I think, need to do better. We traditionally have done well with ASCI, and it's been a little bit of a lull, but I think that'll start up. I recently was inducted into the AAP. We had some Kimmel Awards. Ben Major had an ACS. Mike Emanuel just heard about a Komen, and I think maybe actually having a baby right now, so I don't believe he's here today. Carrie Anders recently got a Mary Kay grant, and Ethan has been asked to serve on the advisory board of the NCI. So really nice awards for the faculty as well. So I think from the point of view of grants, publications, awards, the institution is doing splendidly. I'll talk now a little bit about the UCRF Refresh, which is a process that I think most of you have at least heard about. And so the idea is that the UCRF, for many of you who don't know, is the University Cancer Research Fund. It started in 2008, really was the first year we got funding. And the sort of funding is shown here. $25 million in the first year, $40 million in the second year, $50 million for 3 years, and then last year $42 million. So a substantial cut last year that we have mostly worked into the budget, but we're still sort of incorporating those effects into the UCR budget now as we speak. The funding sources of last year were mostly from this other tobacco products tax, and whether or not e-cigarettes count as an other tobacco products may actually be important to the Lineberger Cancer Center very soon. And then the general fund made a contribution as well. And the funding ratio here may change. This is not set in stone by statute, so this is one of the things the legislature could choose to do differently. And importantly, we don't really know what next year's budget is and won't probably for at least another month. Generally, the new budget is produced sort of toward the end of June. The short session started today. And I'll say this is the one piece of sort of not really bad news, but maybe gray news, is that we just don't know. It's not certain what's going to happen. And frankly, I'm a little worried because the state budget this year is not good. We just heard there's a $400 million shortfall. This particular legislation believes in low taxes and low spending. So no one would complain if we only got $42 million. I mean, that's a really wonderful investment by the state of North Carolina. We should always remember that. But it's a tough funding environment. Having said that, I can tell you that the UCRF and preservation of the UCRF is one of, if not the top priorities of Dean Roper, Carol Folt, and Tom Ross. So the university system as a whole has really made this an important thing and has lobbied actively in a variety of ways, both above it, sort of in front of and behind the scenes. So, I think we're doing everything we can to preserve this vital funding stream, but we just won't know for a while longer. This refresh program is something, so one of the ways that I think we can help prove to the state of North Carolina that this is money well spent is by being very good stewards of the funds. And so when I started in January, I asked, with the help of some consultants in Boston, Joel Altshuler and Sarah Statz, to redo an evaluation of how we spent the UCRF funding in the past and what we're planning to do in the future. And so this is the structure that we sort of hit upon. It has these multiple parts, which includes a faculty survey. I'll show a little bit of results of that today. Interviews with a lot of the stakeholders, the chancellor, the dean, et cetera, et cetera. And then external evaluations. So we prepared these documents and PowerPoint presentations, and they were read by people outside of the university for comments and as an evaluation. And then lastly, we had these presentations, these 2 days of sort of 15 presentations on these new initiatives that many of you attended, and they were quite wonderful. All of that information will be available soon on a website, as well as this presentation today, which counts as part of the UCRF Refresh, that I'll send a link to everyone soon, so that if you miss those presentations and want to learn more about the UCRF and the various initiatives, that will be relatively easy to do. And now we're sort of running now here where this analysis is almost wrapped up. We're going to present the data to the Program Planning Committee on May 22nd, which is next week, and begin a discussion of how the UCRF goes forward. That discussion will guide what we then present later to the dean and the coordinating committee, which is one of the major decision-making bodies for the UCRF. So I think we have to plan two things. What budget do we have for next year, which, as I said, is a very difficult thing since we don't know how much money we're getting for next year. But also, I think into the fall, we'll plan an even longer discussion of, is the UCRF really the right framework we'd envisioned? Are the three big bets the right three big bets? Is the opportunity fund working? So I think that really the structure of the UCRF will be sort of on the table. Now, having heard a lot of the feedback from the polling process and the faculty comments so far, I can tell you that generally the sense is that the UCRF is working very well and that major changes are not really in the offing. But I think that we have to be open to all possibilities as we sort of engage in this vital process going forward. So as I mentioned, this is a result from the poll. We sent a poll out to 450 faculty members, and about 30% of you responded, which is typical, I think, for a UNC faculty survey. This is sort of what we heard from the responders, which is UCRF's been great. We stuck to the strategy. The initial idea of investing in a few things and really doing them well has worked. It's built capacity. It's built added equipment and infrastructure. It's had a broad impact across campus, and I think that's undoubtedly true. And it's improved and increased the stature of the campus naturally, both clinically and in basic science, and I think in population sciences, and that is also undoubtedly true. When we ask people what they think works better and worse, there is some heterogeneity. So I think that the sense is that things genomic are really, really working well. So a 5 here is a very strong, and a 1 is weak, and you see that sort of the average score for genomics is 4.5. But the point is, everything is sort of got a pretty good score. I think probably the more important part of this slide to me is that the don't know response is quite high. In some cases 50 or 60%. So that tells me some of these things are like major initiatives that we've really spent a lot of time and money on, and half the respondents at this institution don't really know about them. So that clearly says to me there's a bit of a marketing problem internally, that we need to tell each other what the UCRF does and how it's been important to the university in a better way. And as I said, there will be a link making that possible. We created a number of materials to publicize the UCRF, but I hope that those of you interested in this will avail yourself of that opportunity to really learn more about it and why it's important to our institution. Just to remind you, it does have this structure of sort of 3 big bets, an opportunity fund and an infrastructure fund. And I show this because I just want to now talk briefly about recruitment, about what the UCRF has done in terms of bringing people here. And if you start since 2007 to now and look at who's been recruited by UCRF resources, it's 190 people. So that's a remarkable number of faculty. And it's really spread quite well across the big bets and the various tiers. So no one area has really dominated, but I think multiple areas have benefited tremendously. And if you look at who these people are, they're faces we all know. They're really important people in the institution in a variety of departments. So we have, things like biostatistics and biology, but also journalism and sociology. So really a tremendous impact on the cancer milieu across the campus, because I think people are really the most important investment of the UCRF. And we've certainly used this to bring in a lot of people, all the way from quite junior new assistant professors to established full professors in various areas. And lastly, I think something that is perhaps not fully appreciated is the impact the UCRF has had on clinical care at UNC. And there are many ways to measure this, but one of the best is to look at how many clinical recruits were in part recruited with UCRF funds and what that meant to the recruitment. And you can see it's really, there's sort of no tumor type, there's no disease type that hasn't benefited from UCRF support. So it's really been very critical in terms of the recruitment effort for the university. And lastly, I wanted to mention the Innovation Awards. We did not have one of these, one of the major things the Innovation Awards has spent money on, or one of the major things the UCRF has spent money on, has been these Innovation Awards, which are, as you know, $200,000 awards that we give sort of 5 or maybe 10 a year. And I wanted to see, and that we didn't have one of these initiatives covered because, who would speak for it, really? So I wanted to take this on. I think this is an analysis that Michael O'Malley did as one of his last acts before he got replaced by Chad, and it's very compelling. I think that through 9 rounds, the UCRF has dispersed about $14 million through the Innovation Awards. He limited his analysis to these sort of rounds 2, 3, and 4 through 2008, 2010, where it was easy to tell what the 3 and 4 years later you could tell what led to grants and whatnot. And so of $5 million was awarded to 32 awards out of 167 applicants. So sort of a 20% pay line, which is what we've seen for these awards. They've never been easy to get. Of the 26 respondents, 16 reported getting a grant from work done with the Innovation Award funding. 38 extramural grants for a total of $10 million. 5 of 26 responders reported some sort of tech transfer event, either a license or a patent. And so it's estimated there was sort of $33 million in extramural funding derived from this $5 million investment. So that's a sort of 6-to-1 return on investment. If you think we spent a total of about $14 million in this area, it's probably likely that that investment has generated about $80 million of extramural funding for the university. So a very good investment for us. And I think a really winning program. Not surprisingly, it's wildly popular with the faculty. Virtually no one said they didn't like it in the poll. And here's some of the comments, and they're all good. It's we need to do this. This is really important. And I think everyone believes in seed funding. But I will point out this is the kind of thing that is in jeopardy with budget cuts because it's not really earmarked for anyone. It's easy to cut, and in fact, not enjoyed is not the word. It suffered a bit of a cut last year with the $8 million, and I hope that we can reconstitute this so that we can give these awards out fully. But this is one of the things the UCRF does that's very visible and important. That's really hard to find funding for any other way. Next, I'd like to talk about the core grant competing renewal briefly. For those of you who don't know, the core grant, the CCSG in the lingo, Core Cancer Center Support Grant, is terribly important to a cancer center. It has psychological impact in terms of your score. You want to be able to compare yourself to other cancer centers. It's sort of an imprimatur of greatness. The NCI comprehensive designation is really important from a marketing perspective, but also it's quite a lot of money. It's about several $1 million of direct support, which pays for a considerable number of core and shared resource activities within the cancer center. So our CCSG has 9 programs, and I think they're probably familiar to most of you. They're multidisciplinary and collaborative activities that really allow us to sort of identify programmatic leaders within the Cancer Center to take on specific areas. It has 18 cores with sort of a $2 million annual budget. So if you think about that, that's how a number of these cores in the Cancer Center that we take for granted really work. They recharge, but they're never self-sustaining. They're subsidized by core grant money, and that's why we're able to have such low costs for certain kinds of activities. And then it also, again, provides developmental funds. The amount of developmental funds provided by the core grant is relatively small compared to the UCRF. But when we didn't have the UCRF, and this was all we had, it was tremendously important. And I still think, a $40,000 developmental award to junior faculty or a fellow at the right stage can be absolutely transforming in their career. So it's really not to be underestimated, the importance of that. And so because it's the year of the core grant, and meaning it's the competitive renewal, it's a lot of work. For those of you who don't remember, the document is quite large. It's several thousand, or more than 1,000 pages. It has a site visit that is a whole day event in which many of you will be asked to participate. And we need a list of your accomplishments, what you've done, particularly things that are collaborative. A new thing from the NCI actually in the last year or two is this interinstitutional collaboration. So if you have a great collaboration going on with someone at UT Southwestern or Stanford or something, please let us know. Other Cancer Center core collaborations are really important now. Translational is a buzzword at NCI, as all of you know, and it's something they really want to hear. Not just are you doing great basic science, but how is that translating into an impact on patient care? So we're particularly interested in those kinds of examples. And then, it's nice to know that this investment in the cores is paying off. So we really want to hear how you're using the core to do something vital to the cores, to do something vital to your research. So please think about examples of those and let us know. Respond to your program leaders when they annoy you, asking you for this information and your CV and other information they're going to ask you for. It's very important. And update your NH bio sketch, and that includes that awesome personal statement that we all have at the beginning. And then send it all to Chad, because he's ultimately the person in charge of herding all these cats that is the Lineberger Cancer Center. And I think that I'm really excited about Chad taking this on. He showed a real passion and enthusiasm for the topic that is really, really awesome. And I think we're in really great hands. One of Chad's major initiatives, I should tell you right now, is to accelerate our date. So instead of kind of getting things done at the last minute, we're going to try and have things done earlier so that we have more time to read and think. And our old system has always worked, no doubt about it. The core grant has always gone in and it's always done very, very well. But I think for the new director's peace of mind, if nothing else, then we'll try and get it done a little earlier this year. So the Marsico move and the Lineberger. I think this is of great interest to many of you in the building, and we've been planning this now. There's a very helpful and a good sort of building committee that will probably it's been such a success, I think will sort of take on a life even after we planned all this moving. It's been asked to sort of think about other facilities issues that are broader than just the Marsico building, for example. But we've met several times, and really with Mark Kramer's help, who's been a major director of this, we've sort of now figured out how we'd like to use the Marsico, and we're beginning to figure out how we'd like to use the space that opens up in the Lineberger, and that is an effort that's just beginning, and we really haven't decided. And so after much discussion with various faculty members, we decided we did want to have sort of concentrations, not really centers, that's not the right word, but just areas where common investigators share a focus. And because of the size of the groups and whatnot, it fit very nicely to do a sort of genomics and genetics group in the short wing, and also include some sequencing infrastructure there. So there'll be some of the major users of expression analysis and DNA sequencing, like Neil Hayes and Chuck Peru up here. And then on the other wing, on the longer wing, it becomes sort of immunotherapy land, as well as space for recruitment. And part of that is we expect to have several new recruits in immunology, immunotherapy. And so we think they would naturally fit up there. And then, and lastly in there is a creation of a new sort of bioinformatics group. And that's largely because these people wanted to be closer to these people, and actually these people too. So I think that will really sort of provide some synergies. Keep in mind the Marsico building is very, very close to the Lineberger. It connects with a bridge. So if you are still in the Lineberger and you feel somewhat disappointed you don't get to be so close to bioinformatics, it's like a 2-minute walk. So it's still, I think, really good for the institution to have everything together and so near, and to have a sort of our own sequencing capacity, and certainly to have the bioinformatics people closer. If you think about this for a minute, you can realize right away that a lot of space will be opening up in the Lineberger building, and we are recruiting furiously into that space, and I'll talk about that later. but we are also sort of trying to take the labs that are staying in the Lineberger that are spread out across the building and consolidate them, because that's been a frustration of many of the PIs that they have, a room in one wing and another wing. And so this is now our opportunity to kind of reshuffle that deck. And so we've begun to start thinking about that process. I'm sure those of you in the building have already started to notice that a renovation is also going on in the Lineberger. Buddy Weissman told me he was locked out of his office yesterday because they were changing his floor panels and whatnot. And this is an effort to make the Lineberger still a nice, beautiful building. And this effort will go on for a few years. It's not going to be done this summer. This is sort of phase one, but we're trying to stretch it out over a long period for some interesting budgeting reasons about how contracts are bid out in North Carolina, but also to be as least disruptive as possible so that we never really have to have people move out of the building and can't work for a week or something like that. What we're going to be doing later is not totally decided yet. I think it's important that we think about sort of the HVAC and electrical infrastructure in the building, and have started to talk about that. But I think that there are other issues that will make sort of consolidation of core rooms and maybe even making some of the space more open, like in the Marcia building, are things that are sort of being discussed. So the equipment committee's the sort of building committee is working on this issue now, and I think we'll probably continue that for a while. And then lastly, I'd like to talk briefly about sort of scientific focus for the Lineberger. Many people have asked me about this. What is sort of your vision for the scientific direction of the Cancer Center? And my first answer is, I feel so busy trying to answer my email and get the core grant done, that I don't feel like I can do that question justice. But actually, I have been thinking about this a bit, and I'll briefly say just a word on that. So, the UCRF initiative includes an evaluation of very large commitments that we've made, and I think that we may decide some of those things need less investment or maybe more investment. I think it's unimaginable that we'd abandon genomics, pop sci, and drug discovery. They've all been successful, and I think we're really talking about, do they need a bit more or a bit less? I think the Marcia move will definitely provide some focus in terms of cancer genomics, but also in terms of immunotherapy, and that really is a new initiative. That's sort of new money in last year's budget to build up an immunotherapy program, particularly cell-based immunotherapy program, over the next few years. That is coincident with the building of a GMP facility down on 54 to do autologous expansion of T cells, for example. And then, so that will be important. But I think that these large initiatives are wonderful and they take a lot of time. But I'm really keen that as an institution, we don't really abandon the focus on investigator-initiated sort of R01-funded research. I think that's something historically the Lineberger's done very, very well. And it's tough times for those people because the NCI is all about translation and big science and collaboration. And that's wonderful and great, but I think that if you really think about where the big discoveries come from, it's often some guy working, some person, guy or gal, working in a lab late at night by themselves, and they sort of have this eureka moment. And that really does happen, and I've seen that happen in my life. And I don't think our understanding of cancer is sufficiently advanced that we can just say we don't need any more basic science. So I believe that's something we have to continue to do well. I can think of a lot of examples of that, but one from our own building that's pretty remarkable is this one. So this is Epizyme stock curve. Epizyme was started on the 3rd floor of the Lineberger in Yi Zhang's group trying to purify protein complexes that had histone methyltransferase activities. They had their IPO recently, and we happened to divest our stock right there. Pretty good decision, right? So this was a multi-million-dollar windfall for the university. This is money no one ever planned to have, and it had a financial impact that's going to be great. But more importantly than that, it's also now a newly opened phase 1 trial in humans. So for those of you who've seen the DOT1L inhibitor results, they're quite impressive. This drug is going to work, and it's going to help kids with leukemia. And that's really amazing to come out of our building. And this is going to happen over and over again. I think that we have other opportunities to do stuff like this. So basic science is important. We can't abandon it. I think there are a lot of other stories like this that could tell. Chuck Peru started out trying to figure out breast cancer pathology, and now that's the Prosignia test that you can order. We have gone from basic science to patient care in a number of examples, and I hope we'll continue to do that, but it really starts with basic science. So if you believe that, if you think that basic science is important to still work on and preserve, how can you really help? Because it's not necessarily thematic, it's not big science, you can't really stick people together necessarily and have it work. So I think these are sort of the things that we can do that will sort of foster that environment. So new recruitment, and I hope those of you who've been involved in the recruiting have noticed that we have some really awesome cell biologists and DNA repair people coming through, and that's very much what we're interested in. So people that have more of a basic science focus. than maybe in past years. Not that translational research isn't great, but we have to maintain this commitment as well. A real commitment to infrastructure, and that's why I think it's important to make the building look nice, because you want people to feel comfortable and work in it. So that's the building upgrades, painful as they may be, are important. I think we have to invest in new technology, and we've been very good about doing that. And UCRF has really made that possible, but that doesn't mean we can stop. We have to continue to pay attention to what's new and developing, and will give us a competitive edge in terms of scientific discovery. I think the seed funding, as I mentioned, is very, very important. It's just hard to take a wacky idea and get NIH funding for it. But those are sometimes the best ideas. And so really to do that is very difficult unless you have a seed source. And lastly, I think it's impossible to underestimate the importance of good grants management. And we are really lucky to have a well-functioning OTD and OSR, and particularly Mark Kramer's office that sort of routes our grants and manages our pre- and post-award. And that's very important because nothing can sort of divert to junior faculty more than having to do a bunch of NIH exhaustive paperwork because their grant wasn't filed properly. So I think that these are the things that I want to commit to making work really well. They have worked really well in the past, and I'd like to continue to make them work really well so that we continue to be a very fertile environment for young people with new interesting ideas. And so lastly, that's really all I have to say, and I have allotted a bit of time for questions and answers, and I'd be happy to take any if there are.